On the 22nd of November 1963, shots fired from the Texas School Book Depository shocked the world. President John F. Kennedy's assassination has sparked countless conversations as to motive, who was really behind it, and whether the truth of the matter has or ever will be revealed. In today's video, we will look at the events of that day and the conspiracy surrounding the most infamous assassination in human history. It's perhaps helpful to start with just why JFK was in Dallas on the 22nd of November. He was there to mend a political rift between two Democratic politicians, Senator Ralph Yarborough and Governor John Connally. JFK's trip started the night prior, with Air Force One landing at Fort Worth. The following morning, President Kennedy and the First Lady Jackie Kennedy boarded a Lincoln Continental convertible presidential limousine. With them were Connally and his wife, along with a number of Secret Service agents. There was Agent Bill Greer who drove, and Agent Roy Kellerman in the front passenger seat. Vice President Johnson, his wife, and Senator Yarborough rode in another convertible. Another two cars were filled with staff and members of the Secret Service. A detachment of 4 motorcycle police officers accompanied the motorcade, riding alongside. The destination was to attend a lunch at the Dallas Trade Mart. This meant a journey through downtown Dallas, crowds lining the way, eager to see the president. This was part of the reason for the journey through suburban and downtown Dallas, giving as many people as possible the chance to see the president and build excitement for the upcoming election. That morning, however, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald prepared for his own meeting of the president. Oswald was a 24-year-old former Marine born in New Orleans, but lived much of his life in Dallas and New York. As a child, he was noted for his unruly behavior and was seen by psychiatrists for what was diagnosed as, quote, personality pattern disturbance with schizoid features. When he was 17, Oswald joined the U.S. Marine Corps, where he was trained in radar operation. While serving as a Marine, Oswald was court-martialed multiple times, including once for injuring himself with an unauthorized handgun. He was later discharged on compassionate grounds. In October of 1959, Oswald defected to the Soviet Union. There is speculation that Oswald read up on Marxism and communism as a teenager, becoming disillusioned with the American capitalist system and identifying with revolutionaries, though some suggest that he struggled to fit in and was just looking for something new. Upon arrival to the Soviet Union, Oswald immediately applied for citizenship, although he was rejected. However, he was later permitted to stay. He was given work in a factory and given a modest apartment. But Oswald soon grew tired and began to resent his life in the Soviet Union. He hated the lack of any real social scene, began to resent the bureaucratic constraints on his life, and his girlfriend rejected his proposal of marriage. In 1961, having never formally renounced his American citizenship, Oswald returned to the United States. He brought back to America his new wife, whom he married after only 6 months of courtship. Oswald struggled to hold down steady employment and soon began to act erratically. In April of 1963, only 6 months prior to the shooting, Oswald attempted to assassinate Major General Edwin Walker. Although no suspect was identified at the time, it is now believed that Oswald was responsible. It was understood that he targeted General Walker on account of his staunch anti-communist and segregationist views. Following this attempt, Oswald's life continued to decline. He became estranged from his wife, was living in poverty in New Orleans, and tried to connect with Cuban communists. In September of 1963, he moved to Mexico trying to connect with Soviet Union and Cuban officials, seeking visas and permission to travel. All the while, Oswald's acts were monitored by the CIA. He had gained some level of notoriety for his defection to the Soviet Union, and so he was under surveillance. In October, Oswald moved to Dallas, where he found work at the Texas School Book Depository. The FBI in Dallas were handed Oswald's file and were soon in contact with Oswald. They were particularly interested in his trips to the Soviet Union and the Cuban embassies in Mexico, believing that he could be a spy. They also began talking to his wife. Oswald at one point threatened the FBI agents to stop harassing his wife, stating that they should only talk to him. Nevertheless, Oswald was never considered a risk to security. Oswald's details were never passed to Secret Service as part of their investigation and preparations for JFK's visit. On the morning of the 22nd of November 1963, Oswald took to work a large parcel that he told colleagues contained curtain poles. It really contained a 6.5mm rifle purchased by Oswald under a fake name from a catalogue. Around the same time, decisions were made by the Secret Service as to what car would be used. It was decided that an open-top limousine would be suitable, given that this was a hot day. The route the motorcade would be taking had been published in newspapers ahead of time. Some 150,000 people would line the streets, most of them happy to see the president. This knowledge of the president's route allowed Oswald to select his vantage point, a room on the 6th floor of the depository that faced onto Elm Street. Elm Street was packed, with plenty of onlookers, ready with cameras and recorders. The street was flanked by grassy verges, and the now infamous grassy knoll. At around 12:30, the president's motorcade turned onto Elm Street. The first shot was fired by Oswald, having a clear view of the slow-moving car from his vantage point. The first shot missed, but the second bullet struck JFK in the throat. Kennedy ducked and clasped his hands to his throat and face. Connolly too was wounded, with an entry wound to his right shoulder and exit wound in his chest, shattering his ribs. Connolly, upon realizing what was happening, said, "They're going to kill us all." Members of the Secret Service initially thought that the noise of the rifle could have been a firecracker or a backfiring car. But then a third shot rang out. This shot hit Kennedy in the head, causing his skull to explode. Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who was alongside the car behind, ran up to the president's car and jumped on the back as it sped off. The First Lady at that point attempted to reach back over the trunk of the limousine, picking up pieces of her husband's skull. Agent Hill then pushed Jackie Kennedy into the car proper and covered the president's body with his own, as the car sped off at great speed. The First Lady then reportedly said, "I have his brains in my hands." As the limousine sped to the Parkland Memorial Hospital, Oswald attempted to make his escape. He hid the rifle and hurried down the stairs, reaching the second-floor lunchroom. At this time, a motorcycle patrolman had already entered the depository, following witnesses seeing a rifle from the building. The patrolman drew his sidearm on Oswald, but the superintendent of the depository vouched for Oswald, saying that he worked there. Oswald was able to continue his escape, and he left the building. Keeping a calm composure, he was able to walk around 7 blocks to board a bus. For those in the crowd, many had dropped to the floor or shielded their loved ones. Many people looked towards the grassy knoll, some towards the railroad yard, believing the shooter was in one of these locations. The police searched these areas, finding nothing in the rail yard, but they did find Oswald's rifle in the book depository. Meanwhile, the president's car had reached the Parkland Memorial Hospital, thankfully only a few minutes away from where the shooting had taken place. Remarkably, the president was still breathing, but he had lost a lot of blood. Jackie Kennedy at first struggled to let go of her husband, still cradling his head in her lap. When the doctors began their attempt to save the president, it was clear that little could be done. He had no blood pressure, massive wounds to the neck and head, and no voluntary movement. No attempt was made to repair the head wound, as it was clear that he had no chance of survival. At 1 p.m., the president was declared dead. Meanwhile, Oswald continued to make his escape. The bus he boarded had become stuck in traffic, so instead he called a cab, which took him to a boarding house, and he arrived there at around 10 to 1. There he changed his clothing and grabbed his .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. By now, the police were searching everywhere for the assassin. They also had descriptions from witnesses who had seen the suspected shooter in the window of the book depository. One officer, by the name of J.D. Tippett, came across Oswald whilst in his patrol and drove alongside Oswald as he walked down East 10th Street. Realizing he matched the description of the shooter, there was a brief exchange of words. Officer Tippett then exited his car and walked towards Oswald. At this point, Oswald drew his revolver and fired 3 shots into the officer's chest. As the officer lay on the floor, Oswald fired a final shot into his head, killing him instantly. Oswald moved on, but he was next seen acting suspiciously near Hardy's shoe store. The store manager noticed Oswald evading a police car by ducking into the shop's doorway. From there, Oswald was followed to a movie theatre and managed to sneak in without a ticket. The police were soon called, and they told the officers about Oswald's strange behaviour. 12 officers descended on Oswald as he sat in the theatre. During the altercation, Oswald tried to fire his revolver again, but was stopped by an officer. At around 1:45, Oswald was arrested. Upon his arrest, he reportedly said, "I guess it's all over now." Initial tests showed that he had recently fired a gun, and witnesses seeing the murder of Officer Tippit all pointed to Oswald being the assassin. During his 12-hour interrogation, Oswald refused to divulge any information. When he was shown pictures of the rifle that killed Kennedy, he denied he even owned it. When Oswald was shown photographs that allegedly depicted him holding the rifle and revolver tied to the assassinations, he denied that they were genuine, asserting that they were faked, and that his face had been superimposed. Oswald repeatedly insisted that he never shot Kennedy or the officer, refusing to answer any questions. He maintained that he was just a patsy, set up or being framed by others. This insistence that he was just a patsy would become a key part of the conspiracies that would soon follow. Following Kennedy's death, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president. Johnson boarded the Air Force One plane and swore his oath of office, but he used Kennedy's prayer book, mistaking it for a Bible. Stood beside Johnson was Jackie Kennedy, still wearing her pink, blood-spattered Chanel suit. As for JFK's body, the First Lady requested that it be flown to a hospital in Maryland for an autopsy. On the 23rd of November, the autopsy confirmed the cause of death being a bullet wound to the head, though the autopsy was rushed and incomplete. There was little taken in regards of photographs, nor was there any examination of the bullet's trajectory, and 2 members of the panel were not even qualified to carry out an autopsy. As you can imagine, this too would only fuel conspiracy. None of this makes any sense. On the morning of the 24th of November, Oswald was to be moved from the Dallas Police Headquarters to the county jail. This would see Oswald taken through the basement of the building to an armoured car, through a crowd of press and live news cameras. A local nightclub owner with ties to the mob by the name of Jack Ruby was also present. Mingled in with the reporters, Ruby moved towards Oswald as he was about to be loaded into the armoured car, revolver in hand. At point blank, Ruby fired, hitting Oswald in the abdomen. Oswald was rushed to the Parkland Memorial Hospital. However, there was little that could be done. The bullet had damaged many of his internal organs, and just after 1 p.m., Lee Harvey Oswald was declared dead. The irony is certainly not lost. The assassin killed by an assassin, pronounced dead at the same hospital as his victim just 2 days later. The investigation into what happened would be carried out by many parties, including the Dallas Police Force, the FBI, and the Warren Commission, a presidential commission of politicians and lawyers to determine the facts of the assassination. Both the FBI and the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald had acted alone. No explicit motive was ever produced, apart from Oswald's ties to the Soviet Union and apparent belief in communism. Tens of thousands of interviews were carried out and thousands of reports compiled, looking at all manner of evidence. One key piece of evidence was a film taken by Abraham Zapruder. The footage had captured the moment of Kennedy's assassination. It is truly remarkable footage, capturing a key historical event. However, it is deeply disturbing. One key finding by the FBI and the Commission was that Oswald had fired 3 shots. The first missed, the second hit both the president and the governor, and the third hit the president in the head. This second bullet that struck the president and the governor has been dubbed the single bullet theory, sometimes also called the magic bullet theory. What's claimed is that one bullet struck Kennedy, exited him, and then went on to injure the governor, all in one continuous path. Strangely, the bullet was recovered mostly intact, without any large breaks, and without much visible damage. Skeptics argue that real-world physics and human anatomy make it highly unlikely that a bullet could pass through multiple organs and bones and still look so pristine. Because of the timing constraints and how quickly Oswald would have had to fire 3 shots with a bolt-action rifle, the single bullet theory is central to making the lone gunman hypothesis feasible. Without this, there might not have been sufficient time for separate bullets to separately hit Kennedy and the governor in the way the Commission had claimed. The number of conspiracies surrounding the assassination are countless. This leads on to the theory of a second gunman taking a position on the grassy knoll. Multiple witnesses recall hearing shots from that direction, and some even seeing puffs of smoke. The footage appears to show Kennedy's head snapping back and to the left after a fatal shot, which some have interpreted as evidence of a frontal impact. This points to the theory that the assassination was a crossfire ambush of two shooters working in unison to assassinate the president. It should be noted that no evidence of bullet casings were found on the grassy knoll. Another theory looks to implicate members of the American government and establishment as to the true masterminds of this assassination. Some look to blame the CIA for the assassination, as JFK had in the years prior acted against the interests of the organization. The president had refused to provide air support for the disastrous CIA-backed Bay of Pigs invasion, and the president had fired the CIA director Allen Dulles in 1961. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison in 1967 even brought charges against a suspected conspirator in the assassination with supposed ties to the CIA, Clay Shaw. He was put on trial but ultimately acquitted, with this being the only trial to come out following the assassination of JFK. Others look to possible links with the mafia and organised crime. One clear link is that of Jack Ruby, the man who killed Oswald. For some, this was the mafia tying up a loose end. The mafia could have a motive. Kennedy was cracking down on organised crime. Another theory looks at the possibility of an accidental shooting of Kennedy by members of his own secret police. According to this theory, during the chaos of the initial shots fired by Oswald, an agent in the car behind Kennedy accidentally discharged his weapon. The theory goes that after the first missed shot, the agent notices Oswald in the depository and reaches for his AR-15 rifle under his seat. As he lifted the gun up, the second shot is fired and hits the president and the governor. Both cars then speed up in response, meaning the agents in the second car become unsteady. Due to the cars accelerating away, the unsteady agent loses balance, falls back, and discharges his weapon by accident, just as it's level with the back of Kennedy's head. This unintentional shot could explain why little was done in the autopsy as to trajectory, in an attempt to cover up the tragic accident. Conspiracy will always find a home, especially where there is incomplete evidence and differing eyewitness accounts. The assassination of JFK was a monumental event, so it's not surprising that it captures the imagination and invites many to seek clarity on what happened. But one thing is for sure, the assassination has some unanswered questions, and it's possible that we may never get these answers during our lifetime.